Hello and welcome to Tangled Roots Post-Film Conversation. This conversation is a special program of Sistreams and Ennisfield Wolf Book Awards as part of the 2021 Cleveland Book Week presented by the Cleveland Foundation. My name is Eric Seiler. I'm a professor of film, media arts, and communications, as well as moderator for this conversation. We're very pleased to be joined by two special guests. First, we have the director of Tangled Roots, Samantha Knowles. Samantha is a Brooklyn-based filmmaker and a graduate of Dartmouth College, whose film The Blue Line premiered in 2018 at the Tribeca Film Festival. She also produced and directed an award-winning short documentary, Why Do You Have Black Dolls? And we're here to talk to her about her current film, Tangled Roots. Hello, Samantha, and welcome.
Hello, thanks so much for having me.
It's great to have you. Next, we have the main subject in the film, Representative Attica Scott. Representative Scott was elected to the Kentucky House of Representatives in 2017 after defeating a 34-year incumbent. Her current term ends in 2022, and we hope that she'll be running again. I'll talk to her about that. Hello, Representative Scott, and welcome.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, it's great to have both of you here. Tangled Roots. Yes, there was a lot of things in the media about natural hair being a distraction, and lots of things going on. And why did you want to do a documentary about this, Samantha? And why in particular did you want to focus on the state of Kentucky?
Yeah, well, it really was something that had been in the works for a long time for me, at least in my head. I went to a school, much like the Representative Scott's daughter, Ashanti. I went to a school where they had hair rules that were really restrictive for Black people. This was, I was about 15 years old, and I opened my handbook and read that men couldn't have dreadlocks or cornrows. And at the time, I didn't have dreadlocks and cornrows. I was a female student, but it just bothered me as a Black person with braids. It bothered me. And, that kind of really stuck with me. And fast forward, over 10 years later, 10, 15 years later, I'm reading these articles sort of all the time in the New York Times, about the military ban on Black hairstyles. And I just always felt a film sort of like bubbling up in me. I had an opportunity to make a film that would be supported by, Queen Latifah and Tribeca. And I immediately thought of this subject. And I went out and I tried to see how I could tell this story. And I stumbled across an op-ed written by Representative Scott's daughter, Ashanti, where she talks about her school and her fight, a fight that she sort of waged like years after me, after her school. And the fight was sort of against her school and a similar rule that her school had, where they had banned natural hairstyles. And I thought it resonated with me because it sounded so similar to my own experience. And I got really excited. And at the end, she's like, and my mom is a representative. And she's gonna, this session, she's gonna pass a bill that will ban hair discrimination statewide. And I just thought, I've found my story. I can follow this woman as she, on this journey. So that's how it kind of came about. And in so many ways, Representative Scott was such an amazing subject, and continues to be, and I'm so honored I got to kind of chronicle her journey.
And that you did a fabulous job with Representative Scott. The ending of the documentary wasn't what we had hoped for, but since then, some other things have developed. Can you update us on where the bill stands right now?
Definitely. And I will say, Sam and I had these conversations. I said to her, are you sure this is the story you want to tell? Because it doesn't have that happy ending that, oh, look, we have a resolution, when people usually want things tied up nicely in a bow. And Sam said, no, we've got to be real. And we've got to make sure people know that these challenges are long term. And she's absolutely right. So a year and a half after things wrapped up with Sam, we finally have the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee commit to looking forward to voting on the bill in January of 2022. So I'm going to be following up with him and the chair of our committee in the House to see if we can make that happen in the next 3 to 4 months.
Well, wonderful. Let's hope it does. But this is an election year for you. Is that correct?
It is, but I would not be running for re-election to the State House. I'm running for Congress.
Oh, very good. Good luck with that. That would be great. So you can hopefully move your energy on a national level.
That's right.
So, too. Let's talk about the film itself, Samantha. How long did it take for you to make the film? And, just from beginning to end, when you had the conversation with her daughter till the final edit?
I would say it took about I'm trying to think. It was actually it was actually kind of a very quick process because of the program that I was in, and luckily the life of a bill throughout the session kind of like aligned really well with the time I had to make the film. So I think it was about I want to say like maybe 8 or 9 months from like when I first made contact with Representative Scott until it was premiering, which felt really really quick and rushed. But yeah, but it's really interesting to make a film with it kind of a built-in timeline. It had a built-in finish. A finish. It wasn't the finish we had hoped for, but as Representative Scott said, but that kind of helped too. It wasn't this like never-ending kind of journey. It had an end date that we could hang on.
Exactly, and I like the way that you did that without trying to manipulate it. Some filmmakers want to try to let the story unfold, and you just let it happen without making it too much like a news report. It was a true documentary, so that was really well done. And what has the response been to the documentary, Samantha?
It's been really, really amazing. Honestly, I wasn't sure what it would be because it came, I guess I should take a step back and say, even the labeling of this type of discrimination as hair discrimination was revelatory for me. As someone who's been hearing about this issue for 15 years, having legislators like Representative Scott say this is a form of discrimination and label it as such was revelatory, and because a lot of people can see it as trivial. A lot of people can be like, it's your hair. It's like, and so I was grateful for that kind of language, and that, I made a whole film about this, but I was not sure how the world would see it. And it came out right around the time of the George Floyd protests that were so difficult and upsetting for so many of us. And I really hoped that people would understand what the resonance of this issue was in that larger context. And that it wasn't, and I remember like sitting in my room like writing, because we had to do a lot of press around the film, and I was like trying to write out my thoughts and how I felt like this was part of this larger issue, and not sort of like a trivial side piece. It was part of this whole framework of white supremacy. And I was so ecstatic because people just really understood it. And I think so much of that is Representative Scott, and seeing her in so many contexts throughout the film, and seeing her be, the first Black woman and the only Black woman. I think she did so much of that lifting. So yeah, the response has been really, really amazing from people of color, Black people who have said, like, finally, there's something to call what I've been feeling. And then from people who didn't understand this issue, who were like, I never even thought that this was an issue. So yeah, it's been amazing.
Well, and that's good that you had the foresight to do something like this, and the response you received. Representative Scott, the bill didn't pass. What's going on in Kentucky and in the state? Why didn't it pass? You have legislation brought up about Valentine's Day, and so
Right.
tell us a little bit about your state and your feeling about why you think it didn't, go through the first time.
Yes, and Sam is so humble. I just have to say it may have been an 8 or 9 month process for Sam, but the reality for us in Kentucky was that it was about 8 weeks. Sam's filming here was very quick, and she went across the state with us to do this filming, like literally traveling hours to rural Western Kentucky and other places to do the filming. And so I'm so appreciative of that. I think it's important for people to know that I'm in Kentucky. And although I am from Louisville, our entire Commonwealth is mostly white and Appalachian, rural. And so there are very many people who feel like this is not an issue, and it's not at least their issue. So they haven't prioritized it. In fact, when I first spoke to the initial committee chair, he said to me, "Why would we be talking about this issue?" And so I had to share with him my humanity and the humanity of many people that I represent and why this hair discrimination should be a priority for his committee. He never heard the bill. So now we're working to get it shifted to the Judiciary Committee where there is more reception to hearing this issue. And really, one of the reasons why it didn't get a hearing in 2020 is not only the committee chair, but because of COVID. And people may not be aware, but as we were wrapping up filming, COVID hit and Kentucky went on lockdown. And so our legislative session was shortened. It was already a short session anyway in Kentucky, but it was shortened even more due to COVID. So that really had an impact on our advocacy ability. So we didn't stop though. And I think that's important for people to know. We kept going. We were very clear that this is an issue that needed to be addressed and that there are people who are facing discrimination in housing, education, and employment because of their hair.
So people are facing discrimination, but Kentucky, like a lot of states, has a lot of issues. Why did you want to focus on this? You can focus on unemployment. You can focus on poverty and so forth. Why was you driven? Why were you driven to this issue?
Because they're intersected, they're all connected. And so yes, we are addressing poverty. People who can't get jobs because of their hair are going to find themselves in that cycle of poverty. Of course, we're addressing healthcare. People who don't want to use chemicals on their hair are going to be subjected to health issues if they're forced to straighten their hair or to wear a wig or do something to their hair that's not healthy. So all of these issues are connected. Education is a priority in Kentucky, but if we're kicking kids out of school or removing them from athletic teams or disciplining them because of the way that their hair grows naturally out of their head, then we're impacting their ability to thrive and to learn and then to be able to give back and be part of their communities. So it's really all connected.
That's well stated. Well stated. Jumping over back to you, Samantha. When you were putting the film together, and yes, thank you for letting us know you shot this in 8 weeks and so forth. Is there something you would do differently? Something you'd like to add to the film or take out of the film now that you're looking back upon the film, Samantha?
That's a good question. I think there were so many great moments that we couldn't use. Like some of my favorite, I don't know that I would find a way to use them now, but some of my my favorite sort of section in the film is when Representative Scott is we have her like kind of on tour, going to the school, going to a church, going to a barbershop. And every single time I would hear her speaking in those contexts, I would get chills because she was just so like, it was just like, it was, I've seen her in so many contexts, but I loved hearing her speak in that sense. So there was some of that we had to leave on the cutting room floor that I wish we could have included more of. I know we feature Dina, the woman who has sort of experienced this discrimination firsthand. We didn't have a lot of time and she's great, and she's a great subject. And we didn't have time to feature a lot of other people, but if we could have, I would have loved to kind of just to show the impact of this sort of thing. But yeah, those are two of the things I wish maybe we could have done more of.
Okay, very good. Representative Scott, can you talk about what this would mean? I'm going to say when the bill passes. I'm just being
Mhm.
positive. What will actually happen if someone does show discrimination? Will they face a fine, or what exactly will happen?
So if someone is experiencing discrimination based on their natural hair, this bill, which is called the Crown Act here in Kentucky, would add a fine to that business, that public housing institution, that institution of education for that discrimination. And people would also have the right to take legal action because they've been discriminated against. So we are trying to make sure that folks have some recourse. But what I hope is that once this bill passes, people will think twice about discriminating against someone based on their hair, because now they know we have enshrined in law people's right to show up just as they are.
And it's called the Crown Act. I have a sense of why it's called that, but can you explain why you call it the Crown Act?
Yes, so there's a policy movement across the country called the Crown Act, and Crown is an acronym for creating a respectful environment for natural hair. And so that's what we're trying to create in Kentucky, that environment for natural hair. And I have to tell y'all that this is the first piece of legislation where Black people across our Commonwealth, from Appalachia to rural Western Kentucky, have felt themselves seen. And so every single Black sorority stepped up this year to support the Crown Act. Houses of worship, all these different organizations who have historically not seen themselves reflected in legislation have stepped up to support this bill.
And what about your white colleagues and counterparts and organizations? How have they responded?
Well, they're starting to shift. So one of our northern Kentucky cities called Covington, suburb of Cincinnati, unanimously passed the Crown Act in December of 2020. And then Louisville, where I live, its Metro Council passed the Crown Act just a few months ago, this summer, 2021. And so now we're beginning to see that cities across Kentucky are taking this action, but we want to pass statewide legislation so it doesn't have to be piecemeal, city by city by city, but that we pass a statewide piece of legislation that covers and protects everyone across the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
Very good, very good. It sounds all positive. Back over to you, Samantha. Was this documentary part of um, this was done after your time at Dartmouth, or was it part of any type of schooling or anything? And
Yes, it was done after my time.
okay,
Mhm.
and in terms of funding it, you how can you tell us a little bit about that? How you actually raised the funding for this documentary?
Sure, yeah. So my film was made as part of what's called the Queen Collective, which is a partnership with Queen Latifah, Tribeca Studios, and Procter and Gamble. And it's sort of made to kind of incubate women of color who want to make documentaries. And so there was an opportunity. Tribeca reached out to me and asked me to apply for it in the fall of 2019. And I was really interested in the opportunity. And that's when I sort of had like looked back and remembered that I've had this film like kind of bubbling inside me on the back burner. And that's when I, started digging around and doing my research. But it's this program that for women of color filmmakers, and they gave me the funding and supported the entire process. So it was pretty amazing.
Had the funders reacted to your film?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It premiered la. Um, it feels like so long ago now. It premiered in 2020, in June of 2020. I was going to say last June, but it premiered in June of 2020 on BET. And they're really excited about it. I think they want to promote not only women of color, Black directors, but also the stories that shed light on discrimination. And I think luckily I was able to make a film that really kind of illuminated that and helped them reach their goals in that way. So they're really excited about it.
Let's see. Well, good. Representative Scott, when this bill is up for a vote, do you get a chance to speak on it? And if you do get a chance to speak on it, can you give us a preview of what you will say?
Yes, I will get a chance to speak on it in committee and then on the House floor as well. And then when it passes the House and committee on the Senate side, but someone else will have to present it on the Senate floor. And I will say that the young people who presented to the Judiciary Committee just recently gave me the talking points that I could use. They gave the historical importance of natural hair and what it has meant for us as Black folks and people who were kidnapped and enslaved. And then I get to add to that to talk about what that means today and what's been the impact of hair discrimination and the difference that this bill could make for people across Kentucky. So that's how I would present the importance of the Crown Act in our Commonwealth.
Well, very, very good. I would vote for it based on what you
Wonderful.
Samantha, any plans for a sequel to follow up on this, knowing that this vote will hopefully pass, or to maybe expand this into a feature?
There are no plans yet, but I keep up to date on everything that Representative Scott is doing, and I've thought from the beginning, before I even had landed in Kentucky to film, that she could be her own film, her own feature film beyond even her work on this hair bill. She's done incredible work in Kentucky, and now she's running for Congress. So I've had a few pangs of oh man, the kind of common filmmaker pang of should I go back to Kentucky? But yeah, I encourage everyone to keep up to date with everything that Rep. Scott is doing, because it's inspiring.
So yes, you are running for Congress, Representative Scott. How's the campaign going?
Well, thanks for asking that question. And it's a we campaign. It's an us campaign. It's about community. It's about people who for so long have felt powerless and voiceless. And after the uprisings of 2020, and right here in our own backyard of Louisville, Kentucky, over 900 people unjustly arrested, including me and my daughter. It was time to send someone to DC who's going to fight for all of us, who's going to fight to protect protesters and hold police accountable. And yes, stand up for our right to wear our hair naturally and to fight for racial justice. So I am that person, and I look forward to taking that fight to DC. And Sam, hey, listen, I'm always here if you want to come back to Kentucky. We'd love to have you.
And hopefully heading down to DC too. The election is in November.
So our primary election is in May of 2022.
Okay.
So I'm in a primary.
Okay. Very, very good. Samantha, what's the one takeaway you would like people to see from this film? If someone says to you, Samantha, what are you doing? I'm a filmmaker. I just made a film on natural hair, and it says, what would you tell someone that you would want to know about this film?
So I have to give two takeaways, if that's okay.
That's fine.
I think the bigger thing, and the thing that I think I learned, was just seeing this issue as what I see is deeply rooted in kind of the fabric of white supremacy, and seeing all the ways in which white supremacy kind of has insidiously seeped into so much of what we think is normal. It shocked me how many schools have rules like this. It shocked me. And, hopefully films like mine, bills like Representative Scott's, can point out all of those things and say, this is not normal. This is white supremacy. This is white supremacy seeped into all of the cracks that, of what this country has been built on. And it's been, kind of accepted and sanctioned for so long. So that's sort of my headline takeaway. But my other takeaway is really kind of about Representative Scott's story in itself, and how how we had to sort of grapple with the idea that there wasn't a happy ending. When I was editing the ending, I was struggling with what I knew. It was important to show that this bill did not pass. in this session. And I was struggling with how to frame it and what I wanted to say. And then I found this soundbite from Representative Scott and what I had filmed. And she says something to the effect of, you know, Black people, we know that these battles are not easily won. And, you know, we have to just keep fighting. And I really hope that that's the other takeaway from this film. And also knowing that Representative Scott is continuing to push the bill forward, I feel like just kind of continues the work and the legacy of the film itself too. So those are sort of my biggest two takeaways.
Wonderful. And what about you, Representative Scott? This film isn't a tool just to help get a bill passed. You know, it's much more deeper than that. So what would you like people to take away from the film?
Well, for me, the primary takeaway is that Sam poured into a policy movement, that Sam found a way to document an effort to change legislation that can change people's lives. And as a Black woman elected official who came from community activism and organizing, I want to lift up Sam for having that vision and saying, yes, let's make this a reality, because we need to tell this story and to tell it from the perspective of someone in a Southern state where we don't always have these victories, right? Where we have these challenges that last years and years and years, and sometimes decades and decades and decades. And so thank you, Sam, for pouring into us and for, as you said, not only giving us a tool that we can use, because we've definitely used this as a tool, but also to show that there is a policy movement that's happening, and it's happening across the country, including in our Southern states, and that our stories deserve to be documented and told as well, so that we build our collective power across this country as Black folks. And that's exactly what we're doing with Tangled Roots. And thank y'all so much for amplifying and highlighting Tangled Roots today.
Well, you're quite welcome. We enjoyed having both of you. In a couple of minutes that we had left, I'm going to ask you both about what this is part of the Anisfield Wolf Book Awards program that we have here in Cleveland, Ohio, which celebrates authors who have brought forth issues about race. And I'm going to ask if there's a particular book in your life that has maybe made an impact, since this program is about literature. But before I ask you that question, one last question I have for you, Samantha, is the title, Tangled Roots. How did you come up with that title?
I'm trying to remember. I think it just kind of came to me. It was sort of, you know, it sort of has this double meaning of, like, you know, it references hair and the way that our hair is sort of like seen and by society, but also it kind of references the deeply rooted, you know, this deeply rooted issue. And so, it actually at first was just kind of a shorthand in how I would refer to the film. I wasn't sure if it would be the name of the film, and it just kind of stuck.
You had a working title stuck. And what about, is there a particular book that you, that may have had an impact on your life that you would like to share?
It's a good question. I can't think of one off the top of my head. I do. One of my favorite books is Americana, and it's about this Nigerian woman who moves to the States, and I don't know that this is the book that you know maybe had the deepest impact, but I remember there was a scene about her getting her hair braided in that book, and it just resonated with me because I had never heard someone describe so specifically what it's like to get your hair braided, and the meaning and throughout the book, her hair sort of plays a significant role in her life, and it sort of aligns with where she is, you know, throughout this kind of 15-year journey. And I'd never seen hair sort of like talked about that in a book in that way. And it just really resonated to me at the age I read it, I think like ages ago now for the first time. But that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay, it seems like you were destined to make this documentary. What about you, Representative Scott? Is there a book that jumps out from your life?
Thank you for that question. So I love sci-fi and fantasy. And so one of the first books that I read that was by a Black author was Aftermath by LeVar Burton. And it was before I got introduced to Octavia Butler, N.K. Jemisin, anyone else. And so I have to lift up Aftermath because for me as a young Black nerd at the time, thinking I'm the only Black person who likes sci-fi, it was pretty cool to read Aftermath and to see myself in a piece of literature that was written by a Black man who I watched on TV growing up with Reading Rainbow, and to be affirmed in that way. So I'm still a sci-fi head, love some sci-fi, and I think that sci-fi is our path forward as people, and particularly as Black people, to be able to see ourselves in a different light, in a different way.
Well, it's always interesting to hear what's on people's literary shelves. So, well, great. Well, thank you so much for taking time out and joining us. Samantha Knowles, Director of Tangled Roots, wishing you all the best with your future projects. And Representative Scott, wishing you the best and your career. Hopefully next time we'll be calling you Congresswoman Scott. Thank you for joining us. And thank you to our audience for joining us for this important conversation. For more information about Sif Streams and Anisfield Wolf Book Awards program, please visit clevelandfilm.org or anisfield-wolf.org. I'm Eric Seiler. Thank you.